Hey guys, Kargath here again, here to do the next Know Your Tanks with the 60 TP, this Polish beast. So, first thing of note is it's got a little bit smaller crew, four members, putting a little bit more pressure on your commander here, who is the radio operator. So you're going to end up having to take Brothers in Arms, Sixth Sense, Recon, and Situational awareness all on the commander before you can take repairs, Jack of all trades, anything like that, putting some pressure there. Moving on to the gunner, thankfully he's just a gunner, but like always, brothers in arms, snapshot, and repairs because it's a heavy tank. Always kind of want to get those repairs rolling, at some point. Moving on to the driver, brother in arms, smooth ride, repairs. I will say this tank doesn't have the worst traverse, but certainly not the best. So at some point, picking up clutch braking is your fourth or your fifth skill, probably a good call. And then last but not least, the loader here, just a loader. Brothers in Arms, Adrenaline Rush repairs, or you can go Brothers in Arms, Safe Stowage repairs. It's really if you want to protect that ammo rack or do you want to potentially get that little bit of damage there at the end, kind of up to you. Now, moving on to the gun on this thing, it's 152 millimeter. It's an absolute beast. It's amongst the highest caliber guns in the game. And something really cool about World of Tanks is it has the overmatch function, where if a caliber of a gun is more than 3 times that of a plate, so any 50 millimeter plate will be overmatched by this, meaning that a ricochet is not possible. So if you shoot at the sides of many tanks who are trying to side scrape, if you have a little medium trying to side scrape against you, you're just going to overmatch the side of their tank, and it's just not going to matter. You're going to go right through that side armor. So that's always something to remember. When it comes to 50 millimeter plates on heavies, though, there aren't many side 50 millimeter plates. It's really just the 50B and T57 heavy for the most part, which case you're going to go through those all right away no matter what. But something important to remember about this tank is it has a great ammo selection where it's got really strong standard rounds. It's got fantastic heat rounds, 317 pen that just crushes through any kind of cheeks or any kind of armor like that. But remember, with heat, you don't want to shoot it into tracks. You don't want to shoot into spaced armor. So often with this tank, you're going to be going up against super conquerors on a ridge here and there. Something to remember: if you can't manage to pen, and it's going to be really tough to shoot heat at a super conqueror with all that spaced armor protection, these HE rounds, they're amongst the best in the business. You know, 3.6 burst, 90 pen. It's hard to argue with this much damage. 950 damage on the HE round on average. So I would highly suggest bringing a good mix of ammo on your tank. Obviously, you can carry more or less depending on what you want. Now, moving on to the equipment. Pretty much the standard heavy tank thing goes. You're going to want a rammer, then you're going to want either V-stabs or improved rotation mechanism for your third slot. But in the first slot, you have a little bit of choice. I like the improved hardening for this tank. It takes it up to 2,860 health with that 10% increased health, not to mention makes your tracks very, very beefy. But at the end of the day, if you really want to try to protect your modules, mod config is always good. Not to mention it's got that even faster repair speed, so it'll bring back up your tracks. It'll bring back up any of your damaged modules a little bit more quickly. Not to mention protecting your ammo rack, fuel tank, engine, all of that. The spar liner is also a good choice if you're taking a lot of RD hits. Something to remember though about the spar liner is it only protects against direct HE shells. So if shells are splashing next to you, it's not going to give you that protection. The shell actually has to hit your tank. As it says, HE shell damage absorbed by armor. There on that first slot. That's very important to remember. All right. So when it comes to the consumables, repair kit, small first aid or large first aid kit, or small if you feel whatever you want. And then for the last one, food. If you don't have a good firefighting crew, if you don't have mod config, you can run that extinguisher. I tend to get pretty lucky and haven't really gotten caught on fire, but running that just in case, it's never a bad idea. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the armor here. Let's go on to Tanks GG. Now, as we can see, this is a pretty interesting model. It's extremely well sloped on these cheeks. It's actually really hard to hit when you're just looking straight on. But something kind of important to remember is this tank does have a compoler. which is fairly visible, even if it is going hull down. That compoler is visible. But an interesting part about the 60 TP is, yes, it has a very small lower plate, and be careful not to shoot the lower plate. That's going to ricochet, but this lower plate. But it also has this driver's hatch here. So if you're straight on, that's a pretty easy pen by anything. If you turn it, look at that. Easy pen there into that driver's. And the tank's not always going to be protecting it. Yeah, if it's guns down, maybe it'll be protecting it. But look at that. It's pretty visible most of the time. Turn it up. Obviously, if it's hull down, you probably won't see it. But if ever trying to side scrape and it kind of overexposes, you can do that. Not to mention when it is side scraping, it does have a small band right here on both sides that are slightly, I wouldn't say super easy shots, but they are shots that you can make, as well as under the gun mantlet. There's a small band right there just above the turret ring that you can pen. Obviously, if the gun's down a little bit, it'll be harder to hit. But this thing's fairly well armored for the most part. It's got great siren armor. It can side scrape fairly well on both sides. One of the things though is if it turns its turret at all, it becomes very exposed. You know, you really want to keep this turret actually head on to your opponents if you are a 60 TP, and kind of try to protect that driver's hatch if you can, and of course your lower plate. You have excellent turret armor, you have excellent kind of side armor for side scraping. Your upper plate is not half bad in all fairness. It's really good other than those driver's hatch, those three plates there. And remember, don't hit the little windows. It's going to be slightly harder to pen. Hit this part, a big meaty part there, and there, if you absolutely can. But this is a fantastic tank to take onto a ridgeline if you don't have a super conqueror. It's a fantastic city brawler. This thing is great armor, great health, huge gun. It can overmatch those 50 millimeter plates. And remember, if you're ever shooting down onto a tank, almost every tank in the game's upper, engine deck isn't above 50 millimeters. If you shoot that top of that engine deck, it's going to overmatch pretty much every tank in the game. There's some exceptions, but pretty much every tank in the game, it's going to overmatch the top of their engine deck plate right there. Also, remember when you are playing in the 60 TP, don't get too fancy, don't get too crazy. Just use your good side scraping things, keep your gun pointed out. You're going to be perfect. It's going to flick off those side armor. It's going to flick off the side of your hull. Obviously, if you can side scrape this way, then essentially protecting this half of your tank, go for it. That way you don't show a compoler, you're only showing your side armor. Much harder to pen overall. Alrighty guys, good luck out there, and I'll see you next time.